This is Catholic Forum. I'm Bob Krebs. Paul Yoder is a talented Pennsylvania-based photographer. He has a new book out titled Maryland's Eastern Shore's Historic Churches. It features 115 churches, and 9 of those churches are churches of the Catholic Diocese of Wilmington. And I'd like to welcome Paul Yoder to the program. Paul, thanks for coming here today.
Yes, thank you, Bob. Thank you for having me.
You've had a little bit of a drive. You live up in the Allentown area, but you came down here to Wilmington for us today, and we appreciate that.
Sure. Happy to be here.
We're going to talk about the book. Before we do, tell us a little bit about yourself, if you would, please.
Okay. Well, for starters, I never really expected to be an author. It was kind of a surprise, but basically, I've lived in southeastern Pennsylvania all my life, short of going to college. Lived a few other places. I attended the Art Institute of Pittsburgh and Salisbury University, and very diverse, different communities. So I learned a lot there. I enjoy photography. I enjoy travel. I enjoy outdoors. I live in southeastern Pennsylvania with my wife. Most of my family's there. We've been there a long time.
Mm-hmm. So when did you first realize that you have this talent for photography?
Really, it started at a very young age, family vacations. We would go on family vacations, my sisters and my parents, and my dad had an old Argus rangefinder camera, and he would occasionally let me be the photographer. And not long after that, I discovered I was much more comfortable being behind the camera as opposed to in front of the camera. So that's really where it started.
How long have you been doing this? Are you a full-time photographer?
I am not a full-time photographer. Okay. I do it. I am retired. I've been retired almost 2 years.
Okay.
I do this on the side. I do mostly fine art photography, landscapes, documentary photography. Documentary photography is really my true passion.
How would you define that, documentary photography?
Documentary photography is more recording. It's a little bit like journalist photography or photojournalist. It's recording things. It's more in-depth recording of history and what I would call social landscapes.
So why did you decide to do a book about the churches of Maryland's Eastern Shore?
Well, what really caught my attention and directed me that way is when I attended Salisbury University. I was there in the mid-1980s, 84 and 85. And when I had free time, I would spend a lot of time driving the back roads, doing photography, taking pictures. And the number of older historic buildings, both barns, churches, houses, residences, anything like that, really caught my attention. And the more I spent time doing that, the more churches I saw. And started doing some little bit of research and found out there's a lot of very old historic churches on the Eastern Shore. And being a fan of architecture and really interested in history, those are the two main things, architecture and history, that really took me that direction.
Is there something about the churches of the Eastern Shore of Maryland architecturally that makes them unusual from, say, other areas?
No, not really. The architecture is very similar to other areas that have old historic churches. I think one of the big things is the Eastern Shore of Maryland is one of the very small handful of places in the U.S. where religion got its start. The Eastern Shore and kind of the Chesapeake region. There's the Western Shore of the Bay, and then that whole region, and then New England are two of the places where religion obtained a strong start in the U.S.
Yeah, that's interesting. So how long did it take you to complete the book?
Well,
115, that's a lot of churches.
It is a lot of churches, and there were a lot left out, unfortunately, but I had to choose. But the idea really came about probably in the mid 80s when I was attending Salisbury University, driving the roads and finding all these churches and starting to do a little bit of research. And I amassed so many pictures. That's when the idea came to me, is having all these files of pictures. At the time, it was all black and white film and slide film, color slide film. There was no digital when I started. So having all these images and having started a little bit of research on it, it really struck my interest. And that's when the idea really got started, and making subsequent trips to the Eastern Shore from the late 80s onward to take more pictures and do more research. That's really catapulted it. And over the last 3 years is really where I began to compile the book, put everything into book form.
Right. So you had a treasure trove of these photographs that you'd taken over the past 30, 40 years, and then you kind of looked at what you had and then decided what you had to go out and get? Is that,
Yes.
to complete it?
Yes, there were some things I needed to get, and there were actually some churches that were last minute, before it went to press. There were probably 2 or 3 churches that were last minute that were undiscovered by me, that I came across, that I decided to add.
Yeah. Well, when we talked about this, you have 9 Catholic churches, correct?
Correct.
And they're the ones. Those are our historic churches. There's only one that you may have missed.
Okay.
St. Mary Star of the Sea in Ocean City. We have a St. Mary Star of the Sea that's in, I guess, Golden Hill or Church Creek.
In Dorchester.
In Dorchester County. But there's also one in Ocean City, Maryland. Was that on your radar? Or you decided
it wasn't.
Okay.
It wasn't, unfortunately.
So volume 2, make sure you include that one.
There you go.
But so how did you decide, which churches to include and which churches not to?
I think basically it goes back to where my interest is in the history and architecture. I think what really drove me to make the selection was any church that had historical and or architectural significance. And honestly, a little bit of favoritism came into play too, as far as churches I liked.
Right.
But I tried to get include a wide spectrum of churches.
Well, let's talk about, since this is Catholic Forum, let's talk about the Catholic churches.
Sure.
Pick a few and tell us about them.
Well, of the Catholic churches, really the ones that were most striking to me, one for its simplicity, St. Patrick's Chapel in the town of Conowingo in Cecil County, which is just across the border from Pennsylvania, right along the Susquehanna River.
Right.
Very plain, slightly Greek style, Irish immigrants, and the town was Irish immigrants who worked in lumber mills along the Susquehanna, and that's how that church came about. So, being that it was Irish immigrants, more of a blue-collar type scenario, very basic, but a beautiful little chapel.
Yeah. Were you able to get inside, or this is all
That
exterior?
one I was not, no, and there were a number of churches I could not get inside. It's just being a distance away, making multiple trips and planning. And
Yeah, for sure.
But some of the other ones, St. Francis Xavier Church, or also called Old Bohemia in Warwick, also in Cecil County, colonial style, very colonial style brick church. And one of the earliest churches that existed when Catholicism was outlawed in the colonies. So it's a very interesting, very long history.
Yeah. I mean, I know that when that was first built, because Catholicism was outlawed, it was made to look just like a plantation or a farmhouse. And then the priests, the Jesuits who founded that, they had to say Mass there in secret. And then when the United States became an independent country, and Catholics could then worship in public, that's when the church was kind of built onto the side of the farmhouse. So that's one of my favorites. as well in our diocese. And and it's kind of, you could miss it. It's kind of in the middle of nowhere.
You could. It's really off the the regular path, but it's interesting too because the farmhouse is still there intact.
Yep.
It's the way the church was built next to it, right up against it.
Right.
It's interesting.
Yeah. And they have a cemetery there, as well as St. Patrick's in Conowingo. There's a cemetery, so you
Correct.
can see, all the names of the folks who kind of were there in the 1800s or 1700s, and
Yes.
and kind of started the whole ball rolling.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Interesting.
Some others, St. Denis Roman Catholic Church in Galena, which is Kent County.
Mm-hmm.
A stone structure, really beautiful stone structure with a large rosette window.
Uh-huh.
Then we have St. Peter's Church in Queenstown in Queen Anne's County, right along Route 50.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, the way the highway has kind of really expanded up against it, but a beautiful church with 3 large rosette windows,
Mm-hmm.
kind of a Victorian Gothic style. Let's see, St. Joseph's Catholic Church in Cordova
Yeah.
in Talbot County, very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of a similar concept to what the St. Francis Xavier is. It's got a rectory and then a church attached to it. And the church itself is very interesting because it's 3 round brick forms which make up the cross. Very striking brickwork too.
Yeah. And that's the same situation as Old Bohemia, where the priests there weren't not allowed to say mass, so it was made
Sure.
to look like a farmhouse.
Yes.
And it's another one that you could very easily miss in the middle of nowhere.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Exactly.
Though.
It's
Yeah.
interesting how those came about
Yeah.
because of Catholicism being
Yeah.
outlawed.
Any others?
Then we have probably the last one is St. Mary's Star of the Sea,
Yeah.
which you had mentioned, the Catholic Church in Golden Hill, Dorchester County. It's got a very strong Gothic revival church.
Yeah. And did you see the chapel across the street?
Yes.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's called
it's
Tubman
Tubman
Chapel. And that's where they first started worshiping.
Mhm.
And it's named after Tubman, who were plantation owners there.
Mhm.
They were slave holders there.
Yes.
And they donated the land, for the chapel and for the church. So yeah, it's a long history.
Yeah, it's a nice little colonial style chapel.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
So my guest today on Catholic Forum, as you can tell, it is a subject that I'm very excited about, is Paul Yoder. Paul is a photographer, and his book is titled Maryland's Eastern Shore Historic Churches. I don't know if we can get that on the camera there, and it's we're going to talk about how you can get a copy of that before we finish up today. So tell us, highlight a few of the Protestant churches too.
Well, the Protestant churches, there's so many, and there's so many individual denominations within the Protestant faith. The big ones being Methodist and Episcopal. Those are the 2 biggest denominations on the Eastern Shore, and you will find the Methodist and Episcopal denominations all up and down the shore. And then there's the Presbyterian, Baptist, Quaker, which my understanding all fall under the Protestant
Umbrella. Right?
umbrella,
Yeah.
correct. And then there's 2 churches that are a little different, and I think there's a Salem German Evangelical and Reformed Church in East Newmarket, Dorchester County. Very small little hamlet, East Newmarket. It's a very interesting church because it was dilapidated for a while, and I have pictures of that, the church in that state. And on one of my subsequent trips back, I discovered that it was purchased and completely renovated as a private residence. And they renovated and restored it to almost its original stature.
Wow.
Which is, no, I've not seen the inside of that because it's a private residence,
Right.
but it's a beautiful little church.
Wow.
And then the other one is a Swedenborgian church, Chapel of the Epiphany in Preston, Caroline County. That I don't believe is used any longer as a church, but it's still existing and in good condition. So those are two that are a little different. As far as the Episcopals, two that stand out to me are Old Trinity Church in Church Creek, Maryland, and St. Andrew's Episcopal Church in Sothersville.
What makes them special?
Well, they're actually, which kind of leads to one of your other questions, I know, is the favorites.
Yeah.
Old Trinity Church is a favorite of mine. It's a brick little colonial church in Church Creek, south of Cambridge, Dorchester County, and very historical, basically from the 17th century, late 17th century. And St. Andrew's is one of my favorite architectural styles. It's a Carpenter Gothic style, and it was taken from ideas and designs from Richard Upjohn, premier church architect in the U.S. Those two are two of my favorites. And then the Third Haven Meeting House in Easton, that is a Quaker meeting house. And that is the oldest continuously used occupied church in the U.S.
Wow.
Yeah.
And when was that built? Do you recall?
1672, I believe.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow. We thought we had long history, but the Quakers beat us to it.
Yes. Yes.
Have you ever read the book Chesapeake by Michener?
I've read some of it. It's
Yeah.
been a long time.
Yeah. I mean, that talks about Catholics and Quakers, and it's all about that area. So I recommend that to our listeners as well.
Yes, that's a good
that
book.
would be I mean, it's fiction, but it's historical fiction based on true history, and it would be a good companion to your book. So,
It would. It would be a
Yeah.
fantastic companion.
So, what do you when you were doing all your research, did you find something that surprised you? Anything that you're like, wow, that's really cool?
Well, I don't think, knowing a little bit about religious history before I started, and then architecture, I don't think I found anything that really struck me as different or surprised me.
Right.
In doing this whole process. Not so much the research and the photos, but once I got to the point of compiling the book, everything into all the information into book form, what really surprised me is how challenging and difficult it actually is to self-publish a book.
Yeah. So what are you working on now? You going to do it again?
I'm not working on any new projects. I'm focusing on, since the book is completed and was released in June, I'm really focused on promoting and the marketing aspect of the book.
Yeah. What has been the feedback from from the public?
It's been really good.
Yeah.
It's been very well received. The book has been is located in some retail bookstores on a handful on the Eastern Shore. It's been well received by the churches and congregation members. I've attended some church services already, more to come. My publisher is a small publisher on the Lower Eastern Shore, Maryland History Press. She helped me. It's a solo venture. She helped me with the book from the standpoint of editing. I'm not much of an English major, so
Right.
her assistance went a long way. She did a lot of editing for me and did help me with some ideas and suggestions, which were beneficial. She had some connections. She reached out and got me in touch with some connections that have been very helpful in kind of a catalyst in getting the book out there in different areas. So yeah, it's been very well received. And I have some events coming up on the Eastern Shore in October and November where I'll be doing signings and different events.
Great. That's perfect. So how can our listeners get a copy?
Basically, they can get a copy a couple different ways. They can go onto my website, paulyoderphoto.com, which is spelled with an F, paulyoderphoto.com. And I did that because there is another Paul Yoder photography. So
you do know how to spell it.
Yes, I do know how to spell it just to distinguish myself. So paulyoderphoto.com, spelled with an F, very simple, and there's a bookshop on there and a shop page on there, which will give you a lot of in-depth information and allow you to order.
Yeah.
and can be ordered directly through me via email, py.photographic@gmail.com, also spelled with an F, F-O-T-O, graphic, py.photographic@gmail.com. Now, that's the best way to purchase it via my email for if someone wanted a larger quantity of like 5 or more, or a tax-exempt purchase. To keep the shop simple on my website, I did not include tax-exempt purchases on there. So
Right.
tax-exempt purchases can be made directly through me.
Right. Okay.
And
Yeah. Yeah. It'd make a great Christmas gift. I mean,
perfect for a gift, Christmas gifts with the holiday season approaching.
yeah, absolutely,
Sure.
and something to buy for your pastor. It's a perfect gift.
Exactly.
So, yeah. So,
Exactly.
Paul Yoder, thanks so much for being with us today on Catholic Forum and talking about your great new book, and we wish you much success.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it. And,
My pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Take care.